So I want to welcome everyone back who has joined one of our previous sessions. Some names definitely look familiar. Welcome back to everybody. And everyone who's here for the first time, welcome to all of you as well. And thank you for taking the time out of your day, whatever time zone you are in, to attend our session tonight. Also, a special thanks to those who helped to make the IUC possible for being here as well. A special thanks to Giles Richter, the Managing Director, Indra Levy, Executive Director, and also Bruce Batten, the Resident Director. So today we'll be hearing from Chris Hainge, who graduated from the IUC in 2008, and also Paul Speed, who graduated from the IUC the following year, couple years later in 2011. Together with their business partner Ben, they run KBC, the Kyoto Brewing Company, creating craft beer in Kyoto. So thank you to both of our speakers for joining. We have gotten to spend some time with them hearing about their journey, and I can't wait for all of you to also hear their interesting career journeys and how those journeys intersected with each other and also, of course, with the IUC. So I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker, Chris. Chris is the head brewer at Kyoto Brewing Company. Before his life as a brewer, Chris studied East Asian Studies as an undergraduate. He moved to Japan for the JET program, and after finishing JET, Chris studied at the IUC in 2007 to 2008 before moving to Kyoto to work at Ritsumeikan University, helping to facilitate their undergraduate study abroad programs. During that time, he started to pursue his interest in becoming a brewer. After pushing the limits of his own home brewing lab and setup, he took the plunge to study brewing formally on the American Brewers Guild program, where he had the opportunity to intern at Port Brewing, which is the maker of the Lost Abbey brand of beers. And then Chris returned to Japan to work at Shiga Kogen, where he was developed by head brewer Eigo Sato and his talented team of brewers. Chris has now been living in Kyoto for, I believe, 7 years. Also joining us today is Paul Speed. He is the CEO and co-founder of the Kyoto Brewing Company. Paul began studying Japanese in college, where he majored in international relations with a minor in East Asian Studies. After graduating, he moved to Japan on the JET program and was stationed in Aomori. That's where he met Chris. They were both in Aomori on JET. After 2 years working on JET, Paul moved to Tokyo, where he worked in recruiting and then transitioned to a career in finance at Morgan Stanley. During that time, he met up with Chris, who was going to the IUC at the time, and he was inspired to also attend the IUC. He graduated from the center in 2011, then he returned to his career in finance, working at Nomura Securities, while also simultaneously earning his MBA from McGill University. Because of his MBA experience, Paul was bit by the entrepreneurial bug and decided to jump into building a craft beer brewery in Japan with Chris. So enough from me. Let's hear a little bit from them directly. So I'd like to toss a question over to Chris first. It sounds like your path first crossed in Aomori with Paul when you were both in Japan on the JET program. And then Chris, you went into higher education work at Ritsumeikan University, and Paul went into finance. You were both telling me that you would never have imagined at the time when you knew each other then that 10 years down the road you would be creating a brewery together. So it'd be great to hear how the idea to create a brewery began to gel for both of you. So Chris, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you got interested in brewing, and then how you got trained in brewing as well.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so for me, I was a home brewer starting way back when I was still in university in the States, and I wanted to kind of continue that in Japan. So while I was working at a university here in Kyoto, took an online, partly online and partly on-site training course through the American Brewers Guild in the United States. And then, as you mentioned in the introduction, the on-site portion of that was done at Lost Abbey Port Brewing in California. But the long-term goal was always to come back to Japan and be a brewer or start a brewery in Japan. So off the back of that, yeah, I came back and worked at Shiga Kogen while we were still kind of getting the remainder of the ideas together for the brewery and kind of getting it all in place. And then a few years after that, just got everything started here in Kyoto. So yeah, it was really just kind of that transition from having something that was a hobby, but always felt like a little bit more than that. It kind of had taken over my life and was taking over my apartment, and pretty much all the storage space we have in our apartment was being used for beer. So that just kind of from there, it was kind of a no-brainer to transition to brewing as a profession.
Awesome. That's so cool to hear about all those different training opportunities that are available for people in the brewing industry. I had no idea about that before. DePaul, I'm wondering about the business side of the brewery. So I was doing some research since I'm in the startup entrepreneurial space, and I saw that less than 2% of people in Japan are working to establish new companies. I think the number is also small in the US, but it's a little bigger. It's like 5%. So as the CEO and co-founder of KBC, I'm wondering how you got started thinking about founding your own company, especially in Japan, where it seems like that kind of thinking is really in the minority.
Yeah, so I was going to IUC, and because of the earthquake at the time, the program kind of quit prematurely. And so I got kind of left out to dry and had to find a job really quickly, and that was in Nomura. I was doing high frequency trading. It was going really well. The learning curve was really steep, but it was a lot of fun, and I had no intention of trying to start my own company. But then I got into the MBA program, and we started off with some, kind of cookie cutter MBA courses like accounting, finance, that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the program, there was this entrepreneurial enterprise course. And we started learning from this gentleman who was a serial entrepreneur. And he started just, not only obviously telling us about how to start the company, but also his backstory. And got really excited about that. And at the same time, I think Chris might be talking about it later, but Chris also wanted to do something more than he was doing at the time too. And because we were hanging out quite often, even though he was living in Kyoto and I was living in Tokyo, we'd be meeting up, every few months or so, just kind of updating each other with what we were doing. And Chris was in Tokyo at the time, and basically I just said to him, like, hey man, there's this course I'm taking. It's a lot of fun. I'm kind of thinking it'd be cool to start something. And Chris was like, oh my God, I'm kind of thinking the same thing too. And we decided right there to just kind of start researching into starting this, and yeah, the rest is history.
That's great. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, perfect, great. Awesome. At CIC, so sticking on the business side, in my current position at CIC, I talk to lots of startups who are trying to come over to the US from Japan. And one of their major concerns is always how do they find customers and how do they create demand for their product. But talking to both of you, it seems like KBC had basically roaring success from the start, and but that success was really no accident. It seems like you really set yourself up for that. So Paul, I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about the story behind how you were able to achieve that success right out of the gate.
Yeah, so it looks really nice on paper. The company starts, and then the moment we start, we put our beer out there and we sell beer in 2 hours. But I think the main reason for that was because of all the kind of the groundwork that we had laid prior to opening. And we had actually originally planned to have opened in October 2014. But because of getting the money, talking to everyone, basically construction delays, we had that port strike at the time as well that delayed actually getting our equipment out here months at a time. By the end of it, we were actually running behind schedule. But that being said, one of the things in Japan that's kind of maybe a lot of the Americans in here might say is really strange. When you apply for your happoshi or beer license, you actually have to show before you even have a company off the ground that there's demand for your product. So how do you go about doing that? Essentially, you have to go to different bars that basically sell craft beer. And you have to say, hey guys, imagine a scenario where we actually have beer. How much would you buy? And so that starts up a very interesting conversation. And basically, after explaining ourselves, getting them to sign a piece of paper, we took their business card, because in Japan, everyone has business cards. We made a list, and we essentially decided to keep them in the loop as to what we were doing. We also created Facebook. This was a while ago. Facebook, and we were just updating people with exactly what we were doing, from the mundane to basically sweeping the floors in the brewery at the time, to basically getting the tanks, to essentially getting our license and then brewing the beer. So there was already kind of this backstory that had happened for KBC. So yeah, basically all of that kind of prep, I guess you could say, kind of just cascaded. And by the time the beer went online, we sold out within like 2 hours. It was crazy.
Well, that's crazy. So you were in Tokyo talking to lots of people in the hypothetical situation that you had beer to sell. And then I understand that you went back to Kyoto to join Chris, while your third co-founder, Ben, stayed behind in Tokyo.
Yes.
So I'd like to turn it over to Chris. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the early start of the business was like in Kyoto, making, packing, and just shipping so much beer. It sounds like it would have been an enormous job. So how were things going in Kyoto at the beginning?
Yeah, I guess it was. It's all kind of a blur. It felt like it both took so long and went by so quickly at the same time. But I guess what I kind of remember in my mind is it felt like we had a long time to kind of prepare. And actually, it was Paul and I who painted all the walls in the brewery. We spent a lot of hours doing that. So we were basically anything from the handyman to the janitor to the brewer to the CEO. We're kind of having all these hats on. And like Paul said, the equipment was delayed, and I still remember the day that it finally came. Pretty much the day after that, for about maybe 2 years. I don't really remember what day was what day and what we did when. It was just everything went by so quickly. So I think we were pretty prepared for starting to brew, but then we kind of realized after we started to brew and there was this great demand for the product because of the hard work we had put in to set the company up on a good footing. We quickly realized that we weren't so prepared to get the beer out the door. We were okay to make it. So the thing that sticks out the most in my mind, my wife now is a full-time employee at the brewery as well, but at the beginning it was just me and Paul in Kyoto doing everything, all the brewing, all the packaging, all the invoicing, all that kind of stuff. But we were getting ready to send our first shipment of beer out in Japan, a little bit different in other parts of the world, but you can self-distribute. So basically, Sagawa Q-Bean comes and takes kegs and then delivers those to the bar. So it was the day before we were supposed to ship everything out. My wife, who was not working with us at the time, was like, "Oh, I'm a little bit worried. I think you guys might be kind of busy tomorrow. Maybe I'll go and help." And Paul and I said, no, we'll be fine. No big deal. She's like, no, I'm kind of worried. I'm just going to go. You don't have to pay me. I'll just be there if you need me, And as soon as we walked into work and realized what it would take to get, I think it was probably 150 kegs with all of the labels written out by hand to 150 different customers, all before Sagawa was coming at 1 p.m. We kind of realized what we were up against, and we were quite happy that Yuki was insistent on helping us that day, and from the next day she was then a part-time worker and eventually became our first full-time hire. But yeah, it was just kind of insane trying to get used to everything all at the same time. And although Paul had gone to MBA school, none of us had actually run a company in the past. So trying to not only do all the brewing and all the packaging, but also running the company at the same time, it was definitely a lot of juggling going on. And I think after that first batch went out, I still remember one night it was just me and Paul at our somewhat put together tap room that hadn't opened yet, and we were just I think the two of us went through a 10-liter keg together and just trying to finally kind of have a breath of fresh air and relax for a minute after all this craziness that led up to getting that first batch of beer out the door.
Wow, it's so cool to hear the real life experience of what was really happening behind all of that crazy success at the beginning. I definitely want to get back to the story of KBC, and I'm sure people want to hear more about it, but I'm also curious to hear about where the IUC fits into each of your journeys. For both of you, it seems like you were inspired to attend the IUC by someone that you knew. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you found yourselves at the center and your experience there. Maybe we can go back to Chris. Chris, I think you had mentioned that when you went to the center, you already had N1. At least in my year, I think it was pretty unusual to see students that had already had passed N1 coming into the IUC. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what brought you to the center. Also, if you have any senseis of note. And I'm curious how the language experience there has contributed to the work that you're doing now too.
Sure, yeah. I think maybe like many people, or at least in my circle of IUC compatriots, like there was always somebody who kind of gave us the inside view to what IUC was like and encouraged us to go there. And for me, that was Daniel Zoot. I think he was signed up today, but I don't know if he's he's here or not. But yeah, I blame him for going to the IUC. But yeah, I had N1, and I think around that time, Daniel happened to be working in the same city that I was in the middle of nowhere in Aomori, and you know, his Japanese was amazing. He's really, you know, great guy with full of energy, and he was doing this really hard job. And I was at a point in my life where I was a little bit confused about what I wanted to do next, and I knew I wanted to stay in Japan. So I was talking to Daniel, and he said, you know, well, he was basically saying, no matter what you want to do next, you know, you have to have good Japanese. And I said, but Daniel, I just passed N1. And I remember, and he's a very straight to the point kind of guy. And he just laughed at me and he said, okay, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, it means I'm really good at Japanese now. He says, no, you're now at the starting line. Like now you can finally start to get good at Japanese if you decide to be. And I was like, well, I never thought about it that way. Like, what do I do then? And he said, well, if you're really serious about staying in Japan and getting good at Japanese, you only have one choice really, and that's the IUC. And if you don't go, whatever you're saying right now about wanting to be in Japan is just a lie. And is very straight to the point and kind of opened my eyes to what my next steps would have to be. So that's how I got involved in the center, and what he said was definitely true. I mean, going to the IUC with a relatively high proficiency level really helped me, I think, even accelerate my improvement even more after that. Yeah, especially working with like Otake sensei and Satoari sensei. It was really that super concentrated, really intense Japanese study that kind of took over my life. And you know, obviously I was living in Yokohama. Paul was in Tokyo at that time, and we'd see each other maybe once a month on weekends. And I think Paul can attest to the fact that IUC almost drove me insane, the amount of study that it required to actually try to keep up with the demands that the senseis put on us. But yeah, after that, obviously, when I went to work at Fritz Maytag here in Kyoto, the language ability that I was able to garner there just kind of put me into regular Japanese business culture, and really with no speed bumps whatsoever. So that was nice. You know, all the meeting documents or emails or, you know, interacting with other offices within the university was quite, I don't want to say easy, but didn't seem too foreign at that point. The downside, I guess, to starting your own brewery is that I don't have as much, I guess, direct communication with a lot of, you know, really traditional Japanese organizations anymore, outside of maybe the tax office. So I'd say my Japanese level has probably started to go down because of that. But at least thanks to the IUC and my time at Fritz Maytag as well, all of that navigation of really, you know, dense and hard to understand, you know, tax language and, you know, application documents for different, what do you call it, hojokin and things like that, was definitely made much easier thanks to the experience from the IUC.
Great, thank you for sharing your story. I feel like probably many people on this call have had that smackdown experience with the Japanese language. It has a way of challenging one. Paul, it would also be great to hear from you about your experience at the center, who brought you there and your experience. You graduated from the IUC in 2011, so you were in Japan for the Great Tohoku earthquake. Yep. And you got to preview the remote learning experience, which current students are also in now. So I'm wondering if you would mind sharing a bit about your journey, if you have any senseis that you particularly remember, and also how it's sort of connected to the work you're doing now.
Yeah, so basically Chris and I, we were up in Aomori. Chris remained in Aomori for a few years, and I basically went down to Tokyo right away. And in Tokyo, I was doing recruitment for a bit, and it was purely in English. And then afterwards, because it was still pre-Lehman shock, I really wanted to, basically I started meeting all these people in IT finance and really liked what they were doing. And I wanted to join them. And so if you had gumption at the time, basically you could take an interview, and if things went well, then, well, you could jump. And that's exactly what happened. But I was working at Morgan Stanley. I was in Japan, but I might as well have been in New York or somewhere else because I was only speaking in English. And I started to kind of question after a few years what exactly I was doing. And then, you know, like Chris had mentioned, once in a while I was meeting up with Chris, and, you know, he'd be going super crazy because he was like in deep Japan. And I was kind of thinking, you know, maybe that'd be a good idea to do that. So I quit my job at Morgan Stanley after getting accepted to IUC. I got the big scholarship and decided to just kind of plunge. I guess it was really interesting with people in the program. there were a lot of people that were from, very prestigious universities, especially in the United States, and they were very focused on their academic track. So all of them were like, yep, going back, PhD program, going back, master's. And here I was like working while going to school. It was a very different experience, but also very interesting. I'd say though that the Japanese, like Chris said as well, here I am. I have to basically make sure that we have enough money. So I'm the one kind of talking to banks. I'm the one talking to the tax office, and definitely the IUC kind of prepped me for that. So even though, for example, there were some courses out there that I didn't take, like classical Japanese, there were other courses out there like business in Japanese through Sato Ari sensei, as well as Aoki sensei as well. Thanks to their help, I definitely was equipped with the tools to kind of help me out with bank applications or whatever, basically for just doing business in Japan.
Great. We received a few questions from the audience members part of registration ahead of time, so I'd love to touch on a few of those. One of them was about just the past year. I imagine being a small business owner, COVID has been quite a shock to business. And in fact, actually, our organizing committee was originally hesitating to reach out to both of you because we thought you must be busy adapting to these new circumstances. But in our chats with both of you, it sounds like you are adapting really well to the situation. So could you maybe share a little bit about the challenges of the pandemic and also some of the ways that you've shifted your operations to compensate and adapt? I think this is to Paul.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there was a question as well about how we got our financing. So just a quick heads up, and then I'll get back into Corona. So we basically had like 33 investors. When I was going to entrepreneurial enterprise, the MBA program, there was a term used for the type of investors that we had in our company. It was called the FFF, family, friends, and fools. So essentially reaching out to coworkers, reaching out to family members, essentially people that we knew. We gave them a business plan, and they said that they were in. So we rallied together about $1 million US, and that's kind of what saw us through the first, I would say, 2 years. Most of that went into the construction cost, as well as for the equipment. Craft beer is very expensive. But then after that, it was a lot of bank loans. So prior to Corona, we borrowed about another $1 million, and then Corona hit. So we had already borrowed $1 million from investors. We had borrowed $1 million from banks. Corona hit, and we knew if we didn't borrow big, we probably weren't going to see ourselves through this. And so basically had to borrow the same equivalent as what it took to get KBC off the ground. And so we borrowed another $1 million in about 5 weeks. So it's pretty crazy. With that $1 million, we finally had a war chest, and we said, okay, what do we got to do? Chris mentioned it earlier, but we were working like, almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was getting pretty crazy. And kind of, 4 years, 5 years in, we were kind of getting really tired. We were kind of getting a little bit lost. We were kind of wondering, we don't really have a compass and a roadmap. We're just like, what do we do? And then Corona came along, and we had this kind of crisis thrust upon us, and it kind of just reset the dial for us, and we got into crisis mode, and it was exactly what, I mean, it sounds really bad because, there are a lot of people unfortunately dying for this thing, but for us, it was a wake up moment essentially. And it basically enabled us to pivot. Up until Corona, we were doing 97% keg. We saw in 1 month that dry up essentially, and we had to get our B2C platform off the ground. So we started selling directly to the customer. We started bottling everything. And now here we are about a year in for Corona, and we're about 50, I would say 50% keg, and the remainder in can now. We've already transitioned to can, not bottle. So it's been quite a journey.
It sounds like it. It sounds like in the midst of all that, you've still been growing and maturing. And some people had commented on the beautiful graphic design. I know you had recently done a new website redesign, and that you've also been onboarding some new people. So Chris, as our last question, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the new things that you spend most of your time thinking about these days.
Yeah, similar to, I guess, piggybacking off what Paul said, Corona kind of came in, or COVID came in and shook us out of our slumber in a way, and kind of realized, it made us realize that we weren't really approaching the company in the way we should have been in some respects. So essentially at that point, we basically, the three founders sat down and kind of redid what we did before we started the company and talked, starting back with the why, like why did we even start this company, and tried to restructure everything with this new knowledge of COVID and this new knowledge that being set in our ways wasn't going to lead to a good outcome for the future of the company. So we spent many hours essentially just reestablishing the company. So that was quite difficult. And then we've had a few new people come in, but I guess, I don't know the hardest thing, but the challenge has been at this point trying to get people who knew the old Kyoto Brewing internally to accept the fact that Kyoto Brewing was changing, and trying to communicate that and get people to understand why we had to change, and the fact that the new customers are just as important as the old customers, but we still have to change modes, and now we have to kind of be able to meet the needs of more than just one customer group. That's been quite a challenge. So it's trying to have multiple, I guess, meetings with the company and with our teams, just try to get people kind of on board with where we are now and where we're trying to go. I mean, that's literally our final meeting regarding that is Thursday of next week. So that's what we've been spending a lot of our time on now is with all the changes that have hit the company, trying to get everybody on the same page about how we're going to move forward through what are still, obviously now, what are they calling it? Mayan Boshi kind of setups that are essentially the lockdowns in different names. So I mean, the end of the COVID effects are nowhere in sight here in Japan. So it's trying to get everybody on board about how to survive through the next, however long it's going to be, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months.
Well, in the midst of all of that, thank you both for taking time to be here and talk a little bit about your journeys. It's really cool to meet entrepreneurs like yourself who have overcome and are overcoming so many challenges to build a thriving business. Before we take questions from the audience, I would like to pass the mic over to Richard.
Open it up for questions. I had a couple here that came up. I think a bunch have been buried, but early on, I think we had a question from John asked early on, how much were you over, under, or on budget? And I think you've addressed a bit, the financing, the numbers. Anything else? Any other comments about, how you budget for something like this?
Yeah, we learned in finance school, basically take as long as you think it takes and double it. Take as much money as you think it takes, double it. And we were still short. Yeah.
Not easy, especially with things like Corona coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, definitely.
Alex asked about the locations for selling online. There is a big list of bars, including a bunch in Tokyo. Any recommendations if someone's in Tokyo?
In Tokyo, just because I'm kind of biased, I used to live in the area, Shimokitazawa. It's not even a KBC like specific place, just Ushitora. They originally started out as a bar, and then they kind of expanded into a second bar, literally next door to their first bar. And a few years later, they got a brewery. They make some good brews, but also they're just a lot of fun. And so if you guys are looking to have a lot of fun while drinking, not the other way around, that's definitely the place to go.
Yeah, I think they opened a new location. The two original ones in Shimokitazawa kind of have changed a little bit, right?
They've changed
but their
a
new
little
location,
bit, yeah.
They have one in, what is it, Miyashita Koen?
Yes.
They have their takeouts place there as well.
So Ushitora, guys, is a great place to go.
Awesome. I will check that out. This isn't a question, but there's a comment. I see Rose, who lives in Kobe. She mentioned that a fellow Jet, by the way, we have lots of Jets on this call. Ken Mukai, a Shimane Jet, opened Mukai Brewery in Kochi.
Yeah.
Not sure if you guys would have heard of that.
Yeah, I mentioned after in the comments, but Ken's a really serious, like majime guy, which is kind of rare. When a lot of people come to us and they're like, "Hey, I want to start a brewery. How do I do it?" Like that's literally how they start the conversation, and that's pretty much the dumbest question you can ask. There's 1,000 answers to that. But Ken came and he was like, he had this like full presentation, and he was like, here's my 30-year plan. Can you guys help me tweak it a little bit? And I was like, oh my God, this guy knows exactly what he wants to do and how he's going to do it. So we were very happy to help Ken, and looks like he's off to a good start down there in Shimane.
Awesome. That's great that they're all connected. Do you know Fritz Maytag? Indra mentions that he's involved in Anchor Brewing. Is that a famous name?
It's a very famous name, yeah.
Well, we don't know him personally, but everyone knows about his existence. He's kind of credited with saving the Anchor Brewery, but then also kind of kickstarting the craft beer movement within America, and trying to get American consumers and also breweries to make things other than just pale yellow fizzy lager.
Wow, that's awesome. And he's an IUC alum. I had no idea.
He is? Oh, wow.
That's what Indra said, yeah.
Oh, really?
And,
wow.
And incidentally, thank you, Indra. Indra was the one who suggested that we reach out to the two of you for this. So thank you. Okay.
Fritz Maytag speaks Japanese.
And if anyone wants to ask a question, out loud, feel free. Let's see here. From Pearson, why do you think it took so long for craft beer to catch on and our tastes changing? I was sort of wondering about that too, because I think we all remember there was that period of a few years where you'd go back to if you were living in Japan, you go back to the US and it was just out of control. And you come back to Japan and you're like, there's nothing like this, right?
Yeah, I think there was always something like that in Japan. It was just kind of on the back burner. I think a lot of people probably know that the government deregulated the industry in the mid-90s, and that started the first wave of the craft beer movement. A lot of new places opened up, and then a lot of places then failed after that. So it went into kind of this dormant background, the very Japanese kind of mania culture. Like if you knew about it, you knew about it. And if you didn't, it was just jibiru. Like you went to some random onsen place in the middle of Yamagata and they were making beer on site. So there really wasn't, unless you were in on that mania crowd, too many ways to get into craft beer. Quite similar in the States, but then kind of that, I guess, artisan revival that happened in the States that, people started making, like Fritz Maytag or Ken Grossman at Sierra Nevada, making beers that they actually really cared about and wanted to drink themselves. That started to catch on here in Japan. And around the time that we opened, that kind of second wave of craft beer was starting to swell.
Yeah. We have this question from Giles about differences between Japanese microbrewers and US microbrewers. Would you say there's any noticeable differences between the average Japanese microbrew?
I guess I can't tell if the question's 100% related to products or the businesses themselves, but just in general, very blanket statement from my side as the guy who makes the beer is that craft beer in Japan tends to be a little bit more, what would you say, hikaime, I guess, similar to Japanese food. I mean, I don't think there's generally a lot of Japanese food that, especially compared to American food, that just is really like a flavor punch in the face. I don't think that's super popular in Japan, and that goes for the beer as well. So if you took the same kind of style, say like a West Coast IPA brewed in Japan versus one brewed on the West Coast of the United States, the one in Japan is going to be much more kind of refined and kind of round and a little bit easier to approach, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I can imagine. I know just thinking of the way my wife responds to certain flavors, I can imagine being turned off by something that's a little too off the beaten path. Ethan asked, when you started, what led you to start specifically in Kyoto? How has that helped or hindered your business? Probably for Chris. Is that right?
Yeah. I was preparing for this question while I was in the shower this morning, but it's kind of two-sided, I guess. Like, as Paul mentioned during his part of the talk today, when I was thinking about becoming a brewer and he was thinking about starting a business, I was in Kyoto and he was in Tokyo. And so as the conversations developed and we started to think, well, where could we start a brewery? We were thinking everybody loves Kyoto. Anybody who's into Japan, whether you're Japanese or non-Japanese, wants to live in Kyoto once. Ben, our third co-founder, studied abroad here, and Paul and I visited here many times as study abroad students and on JET as well. So that's definitely one of the options. And the other was Aomori, which is where the three of us met. And as we kind of sat down and looked at it more seriously, we kind of saw Kyoto, that connection to craftsmanship seemed like a really good fit for craft beer. And then from a business perspective, like especially at the time, there was really no craft brewery in Kyoto that really kind of owned the city, I guess you could say, or had a really strong presence as far as craft beer. So we saw a lot of opportunity there. And I think when we started our first deliveries back in 2015, Paul, there were like 7 places that would buy our beer in keg form.
Yeah, 7 places.
So that kind of shows how underdeveloped the market was. And then right now, I think only for places that have our beer on tap all the time in Kyoto, I think it's over 40. And that's not even all the places that now, especially we have cans and bottles as well. That's only a small portion of the number of establishments that have craft beer now. So we really saw that kind of, I guess you could say, business or market opportunity well in advance as well.
It was also kind of like a selfish reason for wanting to start in Kyoto as well. After living in Tokyo for 8 years, getting packed into a mine densha. I still remember I was on, like, going to work one day, and I was in Shinagawa Station, and there was a Starbucks, and it kind of overlooks this very long corridor, and everyone's wearing the exact same black suit, whether or not you're a man or a woman, and it just looked like a kind of like a herd. And I was really like, is this really what it's come to? Like, is this my life? And for me, it was like, well, if I want to start a company, I actually want to start it somewhere where there isn't this. And yeah, because Chris was living in Kyoto and going to see Chris quite often, I just fell in love with the city. And Chris, obviously, he was living in Kyoto, and so he was in love with the city as well. And what better way to kind of start your own thing than in the city that you really have an appreciation for.
That's awesome. And this is a good segue into, Mark has a question. He said, moving from a stable corporate life to having to overcome hurdles on a regular basis as entrepreneurs, was there any point you wished you could return to your previous lives? Do you ever look back fondly on that herd of black suits?
So yeah, having a wife and 2 kids right now, and you know, we're not really making tons of money or anything like that at the moment. So if I really wanted the easy route out and I knew how tough it was, I probably might have, I don't say I would have definitely taken like the easier path, but I might have paused a little bit more. But here I am. It's already too late. And you got to make, you got to make the best of it. That sounds really bad, but yeah, it's definitely really tough. It's really tough. It's a lot of fun, and you have no one to blame but yourself if it goes bad. But if it goes well, it feels so good sometimes. So yeah, it's tough, but it's a lot of fun.
Paul just welcomed a son last month, so
yeah,
congratulations on that. I can imagine it's tough balancing family and doing business like this. So let's see, Yannick had a question. How did you go about convincing your first customers to give you a shot? What was your key selling point? You talked a little bit about going around and asking people hypothetical volume questions.
Yeah, like Paul mentioned, those hypothetical volume questions, that helped quite a bit. A lot of those places we went to, like for me, I had volunteered in the craft beer scene, events and that kind of stuff for quite a while. So I knew a lot of the brewers, that helped. I knew a lot of the bar owners, at least in Kyoto and Osaka, that helped quite a bit as well. And then Paul mentioned Ushitora a few minutes ago, but we just loved hanging out with those guys. So I would bring them a lot of our homebrew, and they would try it. And I remember the first time they tried it, they looked at me and they're like, "Are you sure you made this?" And I was like, "Oh, geez, it's horrible. What are they going to say to me?" They're like, "This is actually really good." So I think kind of that uwasa, I guess you could say, was starting to spread that maybe Kyoto Brewing could actually make some beer that was worth drinking.
Awesome. This is I had one last night. It's amazing. It's hard to go back to like my wife had a Moretti in the fridge, and I had it. It was just like, this is not beer. So we'll squeeze in one last very quick question from Mario, because I know he's involved in beer, so I'd like to squeeze this in. So Mario lives in Tokyo, or in Yokohama rather, and he said he does beer pairing events. And he said he noticed your beers are consistently in high-end supermarkets like Seijo Ishii. Yeah. How do you go about choosing your distributors, if you don't mind sharing some of the process and challenges involved?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, up until Corona hit, we kind of had this value essentially that we wanted to do everything ourselves. And one of the reasons for that was essentially when we were starting the company, there wasn't really any trust in distributors at the time to be able to cold chain everything from us, and cold chain essentially getting our beer. Unlike big boy beer, we don't pasteurize and we don't filter. And so it means that our beer is quite fragile and we have to keep it cold at all times or else it starts to go bad quite quickly. It also means that the shomikig and the best before dates are also quite short. And so we knew in such a kind of product, the best thing to do was always direct. And then Q Corona and all of our keg sales essentially tanked. But at the same time, we mentioned 282 breweries to 500 breweries. In that same time as well, there's quite a few places that specialize in cold chaining. And so we started talking to those guys. Actually, thanks to Mino Beer in Osaka, off an introduction through them. That's how we got into Seijo Ishii. And then actually in Seijo Ishii's case, it's direct. We do it with them direct. We just charter, cool everything to one of their central distribution warehouses. But we do work with certain distributors now that also just do cold chain. And it's helped us quite a bit. And actually now, I mentioned earlier, we were doing 97% of our beer being sold in kegs prior to Corona, around 50% now. And around 30% of that is probably through distribution.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully that's what you're looking for, Mario. It'd be great. Maybe we could all connect at some point for one of your Hida's online beer pairing events. So maybe we can feature some KBC products. Okay, I'm going to hand the mic back to Lily for a very quick wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that. This was super interesting, and this is the best turnout we've ever had for one of these events. So I think that's greatly in part to you two as speakers. Thank you so much for coming. Entrepreneurship is so fascinating, and mix beer into it, and who doesn't like that? So I just wanted to turn it to Jesse and Chris and Paul. If you have any final remarks, thank you so much for joining us, and it was really our pleasure.
It was great to be part of this discussion. I will toss it to our two speakers. Thank you both so much for making time.
Yeah, I kind of give talks for how to start up companies, and a lot of people ask me for some kind of parting words. Usually I always say if you guys are kind of just thinking about doing something, I honestly encourage you to do so. It's never been easier in Japan to start a company than it is at this moment in time. That being said, one of the things that attributed us to our early success out the gate was a lot of prep. And like Chris mentioned, we get constantly asked oh, we're thinking of starting a brewery. And we say, great, what do you want to do? And they're like, I don't know, I just like drinking beer. That right there is a recipe for disaster. And so you got to put in the groundwork and just work, research. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. It was cool to kind of relive a little bit of KBC history, and then also be reminded that there's so many great IUC alumni out there. And I see that the person I was lauding for my reason for joining IUC, Danzu, joined the call as well.
He's here.
So that was good to see. But like I said, it was just nice to see so many people who are similarly minded to also be interested in what we're doing. So thanks for everybody for attending today.